Ladies and gentlemen, when I first heard that Israel had agreed to an initial withdrawal line in Gaza, my immediate thought wasn't about borders or maps. It was about consequences. Because every time a nation acts out of political pressure rather than principle, it creates an economic and moral vacuum. And vacuums in both physics and economics never stay empty for long. They get filled often by chaos. What we're seeing in Gaza isn't just a military or diplomatic maneuver. It's a reflection of a deeper global trend, one where leaders trade short-term applause for long-term stability and where emotion replaces strategy. True strength isn't in retreat, it's in resilience. That statement alone should make anyone stop and think, because in a world that constantly rewards convenience, retreat often gets mistaken for wisdom. People step back, nations withdraw, leaders compromise, all under the illusion that peace comes from avoidance. But history, economics, and life itself all tell a different story. Real strength, real progress, and real leadership are forged in the moments when everything seems against you, yet you refuse to yield. It's easy to retreat when the pressure mounts. It takes character to stand when standing feels impossible. When Israel agreed to an initial withdrawal line in Gaza, it wasn't just a geopolitical move. It was a symbolic reflection of a universal truth. Decisions made under pressure can reshape the course of a nation, just as decisions made in fear can reshape the course of a person's life. The question is never about how much ground you lose, but about how much conviction you keep. Because when you compromise your foundation, you don't just lose territory, you lose credibility. In economics, we call that erosion of trust. In life, we call it surrender. Strength isn't measured by how loud you speak or how powerful you appear. It's measured by how deeply you hold your ground when compromise looks easier. Every empire that ever collapsed, every market that ever crashed, and every person who ever gave up shared one common flaw. They mistook relief for resilience. They chose the comfort of temporary calm over the pain of lasting progress. But progress never comes from retreating into safety. It comes from enduring through struggle. The markets reward those who stay disciplined through volatility. Life rewards those who stay true through adversity. And nations that stand firm in principle always outlast those that trade integrity for applause. Here's the hook. Weakness, disguised as wisdom, is still weakness. You can wrap it in diplomatic language, justify it with political narratives, or soften it with emotional appeal, but the outcome is always the same: instability. When you yield to pressure instead of purpose, you tell the world that your values are negotiable. And when values become negotiable, chaos becomes inevitable. That's not just true for countries, it's true for every individual who's ever abandoned their goal because the road got hard. You can't achieve greatness by avoiding resistance. Resistance is the very thing that makes you stronger. Think of it like an economy under stress. Inflation, debt, and uncertainty test a nation's fiscal discipline the same way failure, loss, and rejection test an individual's emotional strength. In both cases, the temptation to quit is the same: print more, blame others, cut losses, and retreat. But in both cases, that's precisely what leads to collapse. The ones who rise are those who accept the pain, absorb the pressure, and use it as fuel to become stronger. Just like markets correct to reveal true value, life's trials strip away weakness to expose true strength. When you retreat too soon, you never discover what you were capable of. That's the tragedy of premature withdrawal. Whether from a market, a mission, or a fight for principle, you forfeit the chance to prove your resilience. And once you start stepping back, it becomes a habit. First, you give up a little ground for convenience. Then you give up a little integrity for peace. Eventually, you look back and realize you've given up the very essence of what you once stood for. Nations lose their sovereignty this way. People lose their purpose the same way. So when the world says it's time to pull back, ask yourself, are you retreating because it's strategic or because it's comfortable? True resilience means you stand firm even when the outcome is uncertain. It's the courage to endure criticism, to absorb pressure, to face loss without losing direction. That's the kind of strength that builds nations, drives economies, and defines legacies. You don't inspire others by showing how fast you can back away. You inspire them by proving how deeply you can stand rooted when the storm hits. The most powerful nations, like the most successful people, understand this simple truth. Progress demands pain. Stability demands sacrifice. And resilience demands resistance. When you hold your ground in the face of pressure, you're not just defending your position, you're defining your identity. Because in the end, the world doesn't remember those who surrendered to ease. It remembers those who stood unshaken, even when retreat looked rational. You can't buy peace with borrowed power. It's a statement that challenges the illusion of stability that so many governments, businesses, and even individuals fall victim to. In today's world, where political leaders print promises as easily as they print money, peace has become a product, something negotiated, financed, and sold on credit. But just as no one can build lasting wealth on debt, no one can build lasting peace on deception. Real peace, like real prosperity, requires genuine strength, not the illusion of it. Borrowed power might silence chaos for a while, but it can never create stability. And the truth is, every time you try to buy time instead of earning progress, you're setting yourself up for collapse. Look at the global stage today. Nations throw money at conflicts, at crises, at consequences of their own poor policies, pretending that if they spend enough, the problems will vanish. But you can't spend your way out of dysfunction. You can't buy back integrity. You can't issue debt to replace discipline. The moment you start using power as a substitute for principle, you begin the slow process of decay. Whether it's Israel being pressured to withdraw for the sake of diplomatic optics, or the United States printing trillions to maintain geopolitical dominance, the pattern is the same: using borrowed leverage to manufacture an illusion of peace. And illusions always expire. Here's the hook. Fake peace is like cheap credit. It feels good at first, but it always comes with a bill. The more you rely on it, the deeper your dependency becomes. Just as central banks flood markets with liquidity to mask structural weakness, political leaders flood public opinion with promises to mask strategic failure. But the truth always surfaces. You can't fake strength indefinitely, not in economics, not in leadership, and certainly not in morality. When the borrowed power runs out, reality sets in, and it's usually brutal. This isn't just about global politics, it's about personal philosophy. How many people try to buy peace in their own lives by avoiding conflict, by borrowing happiness through distraction, or by chasing validation through convenience? They spend emotional credit they don't have, hoping it'll buy them temporary comfort. But eventually, the interest catches up. Real peace comes from confronting the truth, not escaping it. Just like in finance, discipline creates stability, not indulgence. If you don't earn your peace through effort, honesty, and endurance, you'll always live in the shadow of anxiety, waiting for the next crisis to strike. The world has forgotten the power of earn stability. Think about it. We live in a time when governments borrow from the future to fund the present, where people seek relief instead of results, and where nations pretend that negotiations alone can erase decades of dysfunction. But peace that depends on leverage isn't peace at all. It's postponement. It's the same as inflating an economy to hide a recession. The problem doesn't go away. It just grows in silence. And when it bursts, the consequences are far greater than if we had faced the reality earlier. Borrowed power is the most dangerous addiction of all because it creates the illusion of control. You feel powerful, secure, and in command until the foundation gives way. History is full of examples, empires that thought their armies could secure peace without addressing corruption, nations that believed foreign aid could buy loyalty without fostering independence, leaders who assumed printing money could sustain prosperity without production. Every single one of them eventually collapsed under the weight of their own artificial success. The same rule applies to individuals. If your confidence, your peace, or your success is borrowed from someone else's approval, you're building on a foundation that will crumble. True power is earned through credibility, not credit. And credibility comes from consistent action, from standing by your principles even when it costs you. You can't finance strength through shortcuts. You have to build it, invest in it, and defend it. When Israel or any nation makes a move that prioritizes optics over authenticity, it weakens not only its strategic position, but also its moral authority. And moral authority, once lost, is almost impossible to recover. The great irony of modern leadership is that it's obsessed with appearing strong rather than being strong. Leaders negotiate from weakness, then call it diplomacy. They avoid confrontation, then call it wisdom. But peace built on fear or financial leverage isn't peace. It's submission dressed up as strategy. The same principle applies to every aspect of life. If you avoid truth for comfort, you're not free, you're indebted. If you rely on borrowed strength, you're not stable, you're dependent. So remember this, real peace doesn't come from the absence of conflict. It comes from the presence of character. You can't print it, you can't buy it, and you can't negotiate it. It's earned through resilience, through discipline, through truth. Because in the end, everything borrowed must be repaid, whether it's money, power, or peace. And the longer you live on borrowed strength, the heavier the price you'll eventually have to pay. Vacuums invite chaos. In markets, in leadership, and in life. Whenever stability withdraws, uncertainty rushes in to take its place. Nature hates emptiness, and so does power. When you step back without a plan, when you retreat without strength, something else will always fill that void, and it's rarely something good. Whether it's a government surrendering territory, a central bank surrendering discipline, or a leader surrendering conviction, the absence of order creates the breeding ground for disorder. The same law applies to economies and to individuals. If you don't define your space with purpose, the world will define it for you with pressure. When Israel agreed to an initial withdrawal line in Gaza, the world called it diplomacy, but history might call it hesitation. Because the moment you create a vacuum, you invite forces that thrive in confusion. Power abhors emptiness, and if you're not ready to occupy it with strength, someone else will. This isn't just geopolitics, it's economics. Look at financial markets, remove sound money, and speculation floods in. Remove fiscal discipline, and debt takes over. Remove confidence, and panic spreads. The same formula repeats. Weakness invites exploitation. The stronger side of the vacuum always determines what follows next. and it's never the side that gave up its ground first. Chaos doesn't need permission. It only needs opportunity, and vacuums provide it. When leadership loses direction, people lose faith. When policymakers lose clarity, markets lose balance. When individuals lose conviction, society loses progress. It's all connected because stability is never automatic. It's maintained through constant presence, constant vigilance, and constant accountability. The moment you look away, entropy begins. In the economic sense, that means inflation, devaluation, or collapse. In the moral sense, it means corruption, manipulation, and decay. The same dynamic plays out in everyday life. When you stop taking responsibility for your own future, someone else will take it for you, and not necessarily for your benefit. When you stop leading yourself, others will lead you, and they'll do it toward their interests, not yours. Vacuums attract control, and control always comes from whoever has the confidence to act when others hesitate. That's why history remembers the bold, not the ones who waited, but the ones who filled the silence with purpose. The ones who stepped into chaos and shaped it into order. In economics, this principle is brutally clear. When central banks loosen monetary policy, they think they're creating breathing room, but in reality, they're creating a vacuum, space where discipline once stood. And what fills it? Speculation, corruption, reckless borrowing, and moral hazard. Markets become playgrounds for gamblers instead of builders. The same is true for nations that surrender control over their resources, their sovereignty, or their strategic decisions. The moment they step back, opportunists step in, whether they're foreign powers, extremist groups, or economic predators. The vacuum doesn't stay neutral. It always tilts toward those most willing to exploit it. The tragedy is that most leaders don't recognize this until it's too late. They think withdrawal brings calm, but what it really brings is uncertainty disguised as peace. Every unguarded border, every unregulated economy, every unlit institution becomes a magnet for manipulation. And once chaos takes hold, restoring order costs 10 times as much in money, time, and credibility. You can't rebuild confidence as quickly as you can lose it. You can't refill a vacuum with the same ease you emptied it. That's why leadership, whether political or personal, must be proactive, not reactive. The only way to prevent chaos is to never create the space for it to begin. Think about your own life. When you stop setting goals, distractions take over. When you stop managing your finances, debt manages you. When you stop growing, stagnation consumes you. Every time you step back from responsibility, something else steps forward, something weaker, lazier, or more destructive. The vacuum principle is universal. It doesn't discriminate between nations or individuals. It only responds to momentum. If you're not moving with purpose, you're drifting toward decay. True leadership, true stability, comes from the refusal to leave space unclaimed. It means showing up even when you're tired, deciding even when it's unpopular, leading even when it's risky. The world doesn't reward hesitation, it punishes it. The strongest nations, the most successful people, and the most resilient economies are those that fill their vacuums with conviction, not confusion. Because when you step into uncertainty with clarity, you don't just prevent chaos, you redefine what's possible. So remember, the moment you step back without strength, something else steps forward without mercy. Whether it's markets, politics, or your own destiny, never leave your space empty. The world doesn't pause for indecision, it capitalizes on it. And those who understand that truth don't wait for stability, they create it. Political comfort is the enemy of long-term stability. It's a truth that every generation seems to forget. The temptation to choose what feels easy over what's right has destroyed more nations, more businesses, and more lives than any external threat ever could. When leaders make decisions to please rather than to protect, to calm rather than to correct, they trade real progress for temporary applause. Comfort is seductive because it feels safe. It disguises itself as stability. But in reality, it's the first step toward decline. The same rule applies to governments, economies, and individuals. When you seek comfort instead of challenge, you stop growing, and when growth stops, collapse becomes inevitable. Look at the modern political landscape, filled with leaders who would rather promise relief than deliver reform. They avoid confrontation, fearing that honesty might cost them votes or power. But the truth is, real leadership isn't about soothing the crowd. It's about standing firm when the crowd disagrees. Israel's willingness to negotiate initial withdrawal line in Gaza might be portrayed as diplomacy, but beneath that narrative lies a deeper danger, the danger of mistaking political convenience for strategic wisdom. Every time a nation chooses political comfort over principle, it weakens its foundation, both morally and economically. Here's the hook. Comfort feels good today, but it costs you tomorrow. The same way a government prints money to avoid fiscal pain, individuals make excuses to avoid personal responsibility. Both create the illusion of control while quietly eroding their own strength. You can't build resilience through avoidance. You can only build it through accountability. When leaders avoid hard truths to preserve their image, they don't preserve stability, they undermine it. Just as inflation is the price we pay for easy money, chaos is the price we pay for easy politics. History is littered with examples of nations that decayed from within, not because they lacked resources, but because they lacked resolve. Rome didn't fall overnight. It rotted gradually, softened by comfort and complacency. The people grew entitled, the leaders grew indulgent, and soon the empire that once ruled the world couldn't even defend its own borders. Sound familiar? That's the inevitable outcome of prioritizing pleasure over principle, convenience over conviction. The world today mirrors that same pattern, borrowing prosperity from the future to maintain comfort in the present. But comfort financed by denial is just a slow motion collapse. In economics, comfort is like artificial stimulus. It feels good. It calms the markets, but it never fixes the root problem. True recovery requires pain, discipline, and reform. The same goes for leadership. When a nation withdraws or compromises not from strategy, but from fatigue, it signals weakness. And weakness, once perceived, becomes an open invitation for instability. You can't inspire confidence through concessions. You can't command respect by constantly seeking validation. Real stability comes from enduring discomfort for the sake of truth, from doing what's necessary, not what's easy. The same principle applies on a personal level. Every time you choose comfort over challenge, you lose a piece of your potential. The workout you skip, the risk you avoid, the truth you silence, each small act of comfort compounds into a lifetime of regret. Growth demands discomfort. Stability demands sacrifice. If you avoid short-term pain, you guarantee long-term suffering. The greatest achievements in history, from economic reform to scientific breakthroughs, came from people and nations willing to confront difficulty head on, not from those who tried to escape it. Political comfort is particularly dangerous because it comes disguised as compassion. Leaders will say they're doing it for peace, for unity, for stability. But real unity isn't built by ignoring problems. It's built by solving them. Real peace doesn't come from pretending everything is fine. It comes from confronting what's broken. Withdrawal made to appease others may buy a few headlines of praise, but it sells off decades of leverage. It signals to the world that pressure works, and once that message is sent, the pressure never stops. The irony is that comfort never lasts. It deteriorates into crisis because it leaves the underlying disease untreated. Avoiding pain doesn't make it disappear. It makes it metastasize. The cost of delayed truth is always higher than the cost of immediate honesty. Whether you're managing a country or managing your own future, the rule remains the same: face the discomfort now or be consumed by the chaos later. The real leaders, the ones history remembers, are those who confront hardship without flinching. They're the ones who speak truth when it's dangerous, who make unpopular decisions because they know integrity outlasts popularity. Comfort is a temporary refuge. Courage is a permanent foundation. And when the winds of crisis come, as they always do, only those built on courage remain standing. So when the world rewards you for taking the easy way out, remember, comfort may soothe your fears today, but it will steal your strength tomorrow. Short-term applause leads to long-term collapse. It's one of those truths people recognize only after the damage is done. In politics, in economics, and in life, the temptation to chase quick approval has destroyed more potential than failure ever could. Everyone wants to be liked, to be praised, to be seen as successful. But when decisions are made to please the present, they almost always punish the future. A nation, a company, or an individual that builds its strategy around applause instead of principles is already in decline. The most dangerous addiction isn't to power or money, it's to validation. Because validation feels like progress even when it's pulling you backward. When Israel agrees to politically comfortable decisions like an initial withdrawal line in Gaza, what it often gains in short-term approval, it loses in long-term leverage. It might earn headlines, international praise, and momentary calm, but beneath that surface lies a growing weakness. Every time a nation trades strength for sympathy, it erodes its credibility. It tells its allies and adversaries alike that perception matters more than principle. The same thing happens in markets when central banks intervene to calm volatility rather than correct the causes of it. They buy temporary stability at the cost of future chaos. Artificial peace, like artificial prosperity, always collapses under its own weight. Applause is noise, not proof. And when leaders mistake noise for success, they start performing instead of governing. They chase optics instead of outcomes. The same goes for anyone who builds their life around public approval. You can't grow stronger by chasing claps. The applause fades the moment you stop performing, but the consequences of your compromises remain. History doesn't remember those who pleased the crowd. It remembers those who stood firm when the crowd turned against them. The greatest leaders are those who accept criticism today to secure stability tomorrow. In economics, short-term applause is like stimulus spending. It feels good. It creates an illusion of progress, but it's built on borrowed time. Politicians lower interest rates, increase spending, and tell the public that everything is under control, while underneath, debt piles up and productivity stagnates. It's the same principle as a person living on credit, spending money they don't have to maintain an image they can't afford. Eventually, the bill arrives, the applause stops, reality takes over, and that moment of reckoning is always harder than the honesty that could have prevented it. The irony is that people often know when they're choosing short-term validation over long-term value. They feel it, that quiet discomfort, that inner warning, but they ignore it because the noise of applause drowns it out. In that way, human nature mirrors market psychology. Investors buy into bubbles knowing the fundamentals are weak, just as voters buy into promises knowing they're unsustainable. Everyone hopes to exit before the crash, but almost no one ever does. Because once you're addicted to applause, you stop recognizing the warning signs. You stop making decisions based on truth and start making them based on what's trending. Real progress rarely earns instant praise. It's uncomfortable, it's unpopular, and it often looks like failure in the short run. Cutting spending, enforcing discipline, telling the truth, these things don't win headlines, but they build foundations that last. Leaders who understand that are rare because it's far easier to be liked than to be right. Yet history always rewards the ones who chose discipline over desire. The applause may have gone to others in the moment, but when the dust settled, their decisions stood the test of time. Think of it like a company that manipulates its quarterly earnings to impress investors. For a while, the stock price rises. The CEO gets celebrated. The market cheers. But behind the scenes, the company is hollowing itself out, cutting corners, inflating numbers, and sacrificing its long-term stability for short-term optics. Then, inevitably, the truth comes out. The price crashes, the reputation vanishes, and the same crowd that once cheered becomes the one that condemns. That's the cruel rhythm of false validation. It elevates you quickly, then destroys you completely. In leadership, in economics, and in life, integrity is the only investment that compounds. Every decision based on truth, even when unpopular, earns you lasting credibility. Every decision based on applause, no matter how loud it sounds, depreciates the moment the audience changes. The world doesn't need more performers. It needs principled builders, because applause may echo for a day, but results endure for generations. The greatest danger of chasing short-term praise is that it blinds you to long-term consequence. It makes you reactive instead of proactive, emotional instead of rational. Nations lose sovereignty this way. Economies lose stability. People lose purpose. The applause you chase today could become the silence you regret tomorrow. That's why the strongest leaders, the smartest investors, and the most fulfilled individuals are those who learn to resist the crowd. They understand that real success isn't measured by how loud people cheer. It's measured by how strong you stand when the cheering stops. Real peace and prosperity are earned through principle, not politics. That's a truth so fundamental, yet so consistently ignored by those in power who confuse performance with progress. The modern world operates like a stage. Leaders make grand speeches about unity, reform, and justice, yet behind the curtain, their actions are driven by political calculation, not conviction. But peace can't be negotiated into existence, and prosperity can't be legislated into permanence. They must be built patiently, deliberately, and above all, honestly. And honesty is the one currency the political class seems unwilling to spend. Politics can purchase moments, but only principle can build legacies. You can promise the public comfort, security, and endless prosperity, but if it's not rooted in moral discipline and economic reality, it will collapse the moment it's tested. Nations rise on integrity and fall on illusion. You can't fake stability any more than you can fake trust. And when trust evaporates, whether between governments and their people or between investors and their markets, everything else unravels with it. When Israel agrees to an initial withdrawal line in Gaza, the move is dressed up as diplomacy, as a step toward peace. But peace achieved through pressure is never real. It's rented. True peace doesn't come from appeasing global expectations. It comes from standing firm on foundational truths, even when the world disapproves. When a nation compromises principle for the sake of optics, it might gain sympathy, but it loses sovereignty. The same dynamic applies to economies that manipulate markets to maintain appearances. The illusion works only until reality demands repayment. Principle is the ultimate measure of stability because it doesn't bend with the winds of public opinion. It's what separates leadership from management, conviction from convenience. A principled nation can weather conflict because it stands on moral and economic truth. But one that governs through political theater is fragile. It spends its energy on perception rather than preparation. The same can be said for individuals. If your values are conditional, your peace will always be temporary. You can't buy inner stability with external approval. Politics thrives on the illusion of control. It convinces people that laws, money, and negotiations can fix everything. But prosperity doesn't come from government edicts. It comes from productivity, savings, and trust, things that can't be printed, promised, or faked. When governments abandon principle for popularity, they replace creation with consumption, responsibility with dependency, and confidence with confusion. And once that cycle begins, it doesn't stop until the entire structure collapses under its own hypocrisy. Real peace requires the courage to face conflict. Real prosperity demands the patience to build. That's why they're both so rare, because they require doing the hard thing when the easy thing looks better in the moment. Every great nation, every successful economy, every stable society in history was built not on convenience, but on conviction. Discipline, honesty, and restraint are the silent architects of peace, but politics silences them in favor of quick promises and empty gestures. It's like printing money to solve inflation. It feels like progress, but it's the very act that guarantees decline. The tragedy of our time is that we've mistaken noise for leadership. The louder the promises, the emptier the results. Politicians hold conferences and declare progress, but the real world doesn't move by declaration, it moves by production. And production requires principle. Without it, every effort is cosmetic, every reform temporary, and every victory hollow. You can't legislate morality, you can't subsidize productivity, and you can't inflate credibility. These things have to be earned, and the earning process is always uncomfortable. Pain is the proof of principle. When you do the right thing, it often hurts at first. It costs something, but that cost is what makes it real. You can't build genuine prosperity without sacrifice, and you can't create lasting peace without accountability. Those who try to bypass the process end up building castles on sand, impressive to the eye, but destined to crumble. The world applauds quick deals and smooth diplomacy, but history honors endurance. Principle is not a strategy, it's a foundation. Without it, every policy is temporary, every peace is conditional, and every prosperity is fragile. Nations, like people, rise when they act on truth and fall when they perform for approval. The leaders who understand that don't chase applause, they chase alignment with reality. And reality, though often harsh, is the only ally that never betrays you. Politics can change narratives, but principle changes outcomes. That's why the future belongs not to those who manipulate perception, but to those who master truth, because truth, like sound money and moral courage, is the only asset that never loses value.